Hey everybody, welcome to Not Another Tooling podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my wonderfully fit co-host on the treadmill, Mr. Matt Malcolm. How are you today, Matt?
I am doing wonderful today.
Excellent. It's Friday and almost the weekend, and we're recording this partway through the World Cup. England are playing on Sunday and they've got a pretty reasonable chance, I think. So is it coming home, Matt?
I don't know, but I will put some money on it to engage further.
It was a big question to start the day. Today we are talking about setting up a product roadmap for your business in the tool chain space. So start with a question is, what do you mean by that? Do you need a product roadmap? What is a product roadmap? What's it all about?
That's a good question. Do you need one? You know what? I suppose the real harsh answer is in some cases, maybe you don't. Maybe you don't need one. Or perhaps the question or the answer to why would you need one will be to avoid some of the scenarios that often take place in organizations where without the clear, not necessarily just product either, but capability roadmap, further down the line, there are scenarios where duplications take place. We've got this product, this function, this technology. And actually, if a defined roadmap for the capability that they had in the first place and associated product was defined well, you would need to stumble upon that. You might have to wait a couple more months for the feature to be released, or you might have seen it in the first place. So it's almost a protection of the investment you've made in the first place, I think would be why you might want the product roadmap. Because you might find that you get what you need from a single product versus going to multiple purely based upon defining the roadmap in the first place.
Okay, nice. That makes sense, and it's a funny one, isn't it? I think having worked for vendors for most of my life, there are not that many customers that are massively interested in the roadmap, other than if they've got specific technology requirements. You do get the odd one that is pretty switched on and says, yeah, I want to see what is going on for the next 18, 24 months. And then you find that if they've not looked at the roadmap, exactly as you say, somebody somewhere goes out and buys something else that overlaps with the tool they've got, and then that happens 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden their job has turned from whatever their day job used to be into integrating loads of tools that they used to have, and they're in a bit of a mess and paying a fortune for that mess as well. So it's definitely something I see on a regular basis. In fact, one of my clients, I think, holds my record, which is 128 tools in the monitoring and observability space.
Nearly couldn't say then, could you? Nearly couldn't say it.
I know. Couldn't.
I'm not going to attempt to say it. It's a bad word.
It is a bad word. Yeah, don't like that word. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that roadmap is important. Absolutely, for sure. But it's quite hard. I think going back to something we mentioned on a previous podcast, it's quite hard to stick with that when you have people coming in to the business, right? There's a lot of change in IT at the moment, a lot of people going in and out. Salaries are pretty high at the moment, so everyone's tempted to go work for somebody else.
No, they are actually. I feel like the market is in a pretty good state generally for a lot of roles.
Yeah.
What is that? Are we in a sort of boom and bust scenario? Are we expecting that to come down? Because at the moment, it seems like it's a relatively healthy threshold for not even the most senior roles in the market.
Certainly what I've seen is there's just not enough people to fill the roles, and especially if you're in a space where your job could be done remotely, you could essentially get a job anywhere in the world, right? Which means you could go and apply for your dream jobs now and go work for BMW but still sat in your office at home, which you could never have done before, and therefore work for big names who can pay big money.
Not Twitter though, because you've got to be in the office.
Well, maybe, yeah. Maybe that's
Anyway,
something.
sidetrack.
Yeah, totally sidetracked there. Yeah, so I was saying that, this whole kind of roadmap piece often gets sidetracked a little bit by new people coming in and then going, oh, but this is my favorite tool over here, and I want to bring that in. And I feel like having a good roadmap with your product that you've already got kind of helps to alleviate that, right?
Absolutely.
Especially you merge it with my favorite subject, which is you turn on this feature and you get this benefit, and that creates this value for the business and this outcome. And therefore, if somebody was coming into the business, they'd have to prove that their tool could give the business a better outcome than your existing tool with its roadmap, which I think is generally hard to do. Don't know. Thoughts?
It is. There is probably a question that we should ask above and beyond the product roadmap. Realistically, how it goes is we're always going to be looking at the agnostic capability roadmap itself. So yes, the product might sit in the roadmap and it might be a product roadmap, but ultimately it's a capability roadmap. So if you needed functionality that covered off A, B, C, D, E, that's what is on your roadmap in reality. It just so happens, as it stands right now, the product that you've got fulfills A, B, C. Maybe in 6 months it's going to fill D. Maybe in 6 months something else is better positioned to fill D. But ultimately, if you're falling back to that business or technical capability roadmap, you already removed any ambiguity around the product and been married to it. And if anybody else comes in bringing their product, it shouldn't really matter. Now, logically, you'll probably stick with one of the products that you've got, given its potential maturity. But ultimately, if you are in an agnostic position and you don't care what technology is, super healthy place to be. And then we always talk about that upstream value. Well, it's more clear cut then, because you're not trying to shoehorn the value into a certain vendor's product because this looks cool. Actually, you're meeting some business objectives with the associated KPIs that service a business strategic objective. That's a very clean space to be in. And then it doesn't really matter what the product is. So maybe the product roadmap conversation is less of the specific product and it's more of a capability roadmap.
That's a really good shout, actually. Is keeping that capability roadmap up to date. And kind of related thing is the disruptive technologies as well, right? And I had quite a few architect conversations recently where they have to keep abreast of all of the trends. And actually, there's some things in these capability roadmaps that you kind of don't realize you need until they exist, but just because we sort of go down like this because this is what we know, and then something comes in left field and you go, oh, we could do a load of stuff. So I think there is some space to veer away from things when there's some real innovation, but like you say, you've got to map that back to doing it because it's the right thing for the business versus doing it because it looks like a cool technology, or one of my least favorites, because the analysts have told you should have it on your roadmap for the next 12 months, so you better go do that.
I think just to like slightly defend a specific vendor scenario and building out the product, you ultimately do need to be leaning on the vendor to understand what they're doing, because that also becomes another avenue to understand what things you could be leveraging. Maybe it's some functionality they never had. And like the scenario with the analyst saying, this is what you need in your roadmap, maybe that information surfaces itself from the vendor because you didn't know about it. Or maybe there's a scenario where, and this is happening a lot, and we know this happening a lot, is a vendor can do this, but now they can also do this, and now they can also do this, and now they can also do that, and this, and that, and this. So ultimately what you end up with is a vendor that provided you this capability now can do this one and this one and this one. But taking that step back, if you just was looking at yourself and your roadmap from a capability point of view, yeah, it might have this vendor, and actually we could stick with this vendor and we could tick these 3 boxes, or actually we might need to go for another vendor. But that multi-capability vendor approach is taking place. That works still fine with a agnostic capability roadmap, but you're looking to that vendor for the guidance because now they can do this, now they can do that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it all boils back down to numbers. In a lot of cases, it's significantly more financially sensible to not to get locked into a vendor, because that is also a bit of a scare for people. But ultimately, it's financially viable to align several capabilities with a single vendor.
Yes.
I do believe that is a sensible position in a lot of cases.
Yeah, no, I agree. And some of that requires talking outside of your comfort zone as well internally in the business, right? Because a lot of these vendors, the bigger vendors now, right, they have add-ons that might not be in our space. So we're talking typically about the IT operations tooling space. And therefore you've got your capability roadmap, but then one of your key vendors has something called in the security space. So finding out what your security colleagues are doing, or risk and compliance, or whatever it is, and not just thinking about your own little bit of what we could do with it, really.
Well, I think that touches on a really important part when you're trying to develop your product roadmap. It's one to, anonymize it so it's more capability led. But actually, as you do that, understanding who your stakeholders are in that roadmap. And right now, the user group might be the IT operations space or whoever. But actually, with the developing components on your capability roadmap or product roadmap, you actually start to spread that potential value delivered to different areas: security, asset management, etc., etc. So that further sort of more broad view across your potential stakeholders, that's an important part. Because, I mean, let's just be realistic. The money often isn't in the ITSM space or in the ITOP space. It's security got budget a lot of the time. Most of the budget, I'd say, which is not a bad thing. But other areas as well, if you can spread your capability roadmap or product roadmap to fulfill several business units, then it's really got legs. Not just legs because, it's going to get used, which is important, and the things you're doing have meaning. But from a pure business perspective, that £1 a unit license is now split 5 ways because you've got 5 different business units. So it's a logical business decision to make as well. But you need to uncover that first, and that's where you need that collaboration, not just with the vendor to work out what's going on, but the rest of the business. So how do you do that, I suppose, is the question. How do you socialize your roadmap to the rest of the business to say, we've got this coming? Any takers?
Yeah, it's a good shout, because actually there's another benefit to that as well, which is that you could speed up significantly the implementation of other bits, not just because you've already got the platform, but because people know how to do stuff with it as well. And you've probably already got some cross processes, like implementing government's risk and compliance module into your ITSM tool, for example, is probably could be quick and fairly painless to do, versus buying a whole new tool for that is totally different to your ITSM tool, and therefore you could deliver the value of this much quicker, rather than just the cost of the licenses, some other costs. But back to your question is, I think what I'm seeing more is IT leaders spending their time talking about things other than delivering projects. And I was at the Gartner IOPS conference, and they said all senior IT leaders should be spending 4 hours a week minimum with the business, and then bringing that back and having those discussions amongst themselves so that they can implement this stuff. And I think a lot of those senior leadership discussions have been, we need to deliver this, we need to deliver this, how are we doing on these projects? Have we had any outages? That kind of thing. And there's an opportunity here for great leaders to show some leadership and to start talking to more and more people, and then bringing that together as I don't just look after my own little bit, i.e. IT ops, I'm seeing what the business needs, and actually therefore I can link up with other people pretty much. Okay. What do you think?
Yeah, massive, really. The sort of communication collaboration piece is, it's always the most obvious thing to do, but always seems to be one of the more challenging things to do. If everybody's talking the same language, or at least understands even existing capabilities, forget about future roadmap. What can we do right now? You could go into a lot of organizations right now, and lots of parts of the organization outside of the immediate or even probably secondary or tertiary teams have no idea that the capability exists. No idea. The existing stuff, not the roadmap stuff. So that in itself is a challenge, because you're trying to then get better use of the product set and you're trying to develop this future roadmap. But actually, if you just looked internal and got the right communication going, there'll be a ton more value leverage from what you've got right now in the current position it's in right now.
I totally agree. And I did a project with a customer about 18 months ago, and before the project even kicked off, we got everybody, all the stakeholders and their second and third in command in a room together. And there's probably about 30 people in the room. And the best thing for them was we went through a incident management process, and we scrolled it up on the board, and they were all talking to each other and going, what, you do that? Oh, you can do that? How do you do that? Oh, that's really cool, I want to borrow that. Oh yeah. Oh, you don't need to do that, blah blah blah. And honestly, they ended up all going for dinner without us, the vendor, and just having a whale of a time, just getting to know each other. And there was so much value in that for them. It was crazy, because just these people talking, like you say, they don't know what they've got today, they don't know what each other is doing, and just sharing that between themselves, they could get so much better value out of it than going and buying another tool or creating their own roadmap for their own little bit of the business. So
collaboration, for sure. It's a massively overlooked. I want to just come back to that sort of cross-functionality approach, right? You're pretty happy with the products and the vendor you're dealing with right now, and they help you develop your roadmap because there's a cool new set of features they're bringing. What camp are you sitting in, if at all, on the one scenario where you can go balls deep with one vendor and all the shiny stuff, versus spreading all of your capabilities and requirements across other vendors? Are you locked in, or are you not locked in? Where are you at?
So my immediate instinct was to say, go for as few vendors as possible. Simply because the more vendors you have, the harder it is to get these things to work together and therefore get to the value that the business needs, is the experience of it. And not just from a vendor, from multi-vendor perspective, but even with single vendors. I used to work for one of the top 4 vendors, and trying to get to a business service dashboard, you would need about 12 products from that vendor, which they'd all acquired, and you really needed a 30 people team to implement them, get them all talking to each other, upgrade them together, and blah blah blah. And nobody could ever do it, and that was just with a single vendor. So I definitely keep the tools, have as few tools as possible if you can, and just be focused on the outcome, because otherwise you'll spend your time integrating tools and you'll never get there. In fact, I remember doing a video of building a space rocket versus out of Lego versus just buying one pre-built. You just want to get to the moon. Just buy something that gets you to the moon. Don't buy a load of little bits and try and put them together. I'm firmly in that camp. So I'm hoping you're in the other camp and you can give me a different view.
I mean, I am very aloof answer. I'm flexible, really.
Okay.
I suppose the question to ask from the other camp though would be, what about the dreaded vendor lock-in? That's everyone wants to avoid that. They don't want to go all in and be stuck with the vendor. How do you defend against that position?
I mean, is it a real thing? Right?
Is it real? That's the right question. And I think the scenario about people being worried about being all in with a vendor, I think shouldn't really matter, especially as well. Any of our up and coming or competing product sets and vendors and things, most of them offer a relatively easy path to move from A to B. So I think less focus about being worried about being vendor locked in for a specific vendor. Focus, as you say, buy the rocket to the moon, get to the moon, because there's always going to be another rocket company you could always get a lift back with. That is the reality of today versus historically, people are so worried about being locked in with a specific vendor, it sort of slows that decision-making process down and progress down. And ultimately that slowness in that decision-making process and that value expectation, that is more financially impactful than it would be trying to move yourself out of a vendor locked position.
Yeah, I agree. And would you rather get to the outcome that your business needs and be locked in than be there fighting with loads of different vendors, not locked in, but you can't get to the value that the business needs? Yeah.
So I suppose the answer I was given there would be like the right financial and business decision. But
yes,
like as a general technologist, have as many vendors as you want. This will be fun. Let's make it work. Is the aspiration, the fun side, the engaging project side, because it is complex trying to work it all out. I mean, all these things are workable for sure, but from an engagement point of view and working out that roadmap and that complexity, that is very interesting, but practically just buy the rocket.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Thank you very much, Matt. We were talking about getting a product roadmap for IT operations today. Why would you need one? To try and avoid a load of overlap between various products that you buy, protect the investments that you have made. And we talked about having a capability roadmap versus making sure then your product roadmaps map to that capability roadmap that you need. And that capability roadmap, along with a vendor roadmap, needs to have some value points to show back to the business, which stops other people bringing stuff in potentially. And then making sure that your tools do meet the capability roadmap you need as a business. There is a space to bring in cool disruptive tech if it has the benefits you need, but spend time speaking to your vendors first, because it's probably financially better for you to stay with somebody if you can make that work, and find out what else they've got in their roadmap, because other stakeholders in the business might be able to get great value out of those tools as well. And you need great leadership so that all of your leaders speak about what they need and where they're going, so you can align those roadmaps. And often people don't know what you've got today in the trial. And you should be off to some winners. Thank you very much, Matt. That was really insightful as always. Looking
Good
forward
stuff.
to one already.
All right. See you in a bit.
Cheers.